Hello, Tom Maguire. I just want to review the book An Innocent Millionaire by Stephen Vizinczey. I apologise for the setting. I'm building a house at the minute, and my office, and this is my office, is basically being used as a bit of a dumping ground at the minute. It's not going to get back to normal for another 4, 5 months when it's finished. So I tried recording it in the kitchen, but it doesn't work. I've got young kids and stuff, so I've come back out here. I've got no lighting, so it's a bit dingy. It's all a bit of a mess. But I just want to tell you why this book is worth giving a read. I want to tell you a little bit about Stephen Vizinczey first of all, if that's okay, and kind of explain how I came across him, and why he's really worth having a look at online on YouTube, because he does his own sort of book reviews and videos as well, which are really, really interesting. I'm going to give a little bit of background because I didn't know a lot about him, to be fair, so I've kind of looked him up on Wikipedia. So if there's anything I say that's inaccurate, I apologise in advance, but I'm just going to go through it just sort of quickly, just to give you a bit of a background. It says on there that he took part in the Hungarian Revolution of 1956. And after a short stay in Italy, ended up in Canada. I'd heard he was in Canada, so apparently speaking only 50 words of English and eventually taking Canadian citizenship. So he cites his literary heroes as Pushkin, Gogol, Dostoevsky, Balzac, Stendhal and Kleist, which is absolutely fantastic. I've read some of Gogol's stuff and Dostoevsky. I'm reading Crime and Punishment. I'm not reading it just yet. My wife got it for me recently in a lovely hardback volume, so I'm looking forward to reading that. I'm really looking forward to that one. And yeah, his best known novel is called In Praise of Older Women, which kind of came under a little bit of attack, I think, back in the day from the feminist movement to a certain extent. I saw an article in The Guardian about Stephen, and it was kind of saying how he had no idea he was going to get attacked quite so badly, kind of thing. And obviously, I sort of sympathise with that. I kind of think I get the feeling that there's very little kind of malice in anything that he writes, really. And let's face it, this is a personal development channel. I do tend to talk about the state of things sometimes, and when you hear things about universities cancelling Shakespeare and things because of racism and things like that, you sort of think, hang on a minute, guys, let's get a little bit of a grip. Just because a good writer is writing about something that you don't necessarily like very much doesn't mean that they're necessarily condoning it or kind of singing its praises. It might just be that they're shining a light on it to try and sort of make a point, or to try and be a bit artistic and entertaining potentially. So I should imagine when it comes to In Praise of Older Women that actually he's just written a very good book. I've heard it's a fantastic book and I will read it at some point, so I'm not going to talk too much about it because I haven't read it yet. But if you look online, AA Gill talks about it, the late AA Gill. Unfortunately, he's not with us anymore. I think he died it might have been 2006, I think. But anyway, it wasn't that long ago. He's a fantastic writer. I've read some of his books before. I did review one of them. I've got another one I'm reading. I will review that soon. But he's fantastic. He interviews Stephen, and that's very interesting. So, yeah. This one, An Innocent Millionaire, I got the paperback version from Amazon, secondhand. I couldn't get a hold of a new one, unfortunately. And it's just a really good fiction book. And, quite often I talk about non-fiction on here. Like I say, it's a personal development channel. But I always say, I've said it before and I'll say it again, my taste in reading, my taste in books is very eclectic. I love all sorts of things. I love fiction, I love non-fiction, historical fiction, historical non-fiction, everything. I'm not going to list every genre, but I love so many different things, fantasy, sci-fi, the lot, everything. And I always say that people can be a bit pompous when it comes to the difference between non-fiction and fiction. They sort of think, when you become sophisticated, you read non-fiction, and that's just really a load of rubbish, isn't it, at the end of the day? I mean, Shakespeare, going back to good old Shakespeare, he wrote fiction, and he's probably one of the most intelligent people who's ever walked the earth, arguably, potentially, along with the likes of Leonardo da Vinci. They're two of my favourites, just for the record. But so fiction is fantastic, and if you read a good fiction book, you won't be the same person afterwards. I can't remember who it was that said that. I'm sure plenty of people have said it over the years. I'm not sure who's famed with quoting that necessarily, but definitely you read a good fiction book and you're not the same person as you were when you started. And this book was like that for me, really. It's difficult for me to put my finger on exactly what I think about it. I'm not going to give you any spoilers because I think that's just a shame to do that. But, you know, it just conjured up some really nice imagery for me. It's got that sort of 80s American kind of high-flying lawyer, power suit wearing, red Porsche driving, getting into trouble, anxious about the world, anxious about becoming rich kind of vibe to it. But it's also got a real kind of sensitivity around human relationships and I suppose the meaning of life and the important things and the scary things. And I felt a lot of different emotions reading this book. Basically, it was sort of exciting. It was there's a few sex scenes in there that are quite good as well, and they're not overboard. They're quite subtle, but they're just good. They're good to read. It's just interesting. It's just evokes good imagery and good sensation. It's kind of, on the one hand, it's kind of a fun sort of lying on the beach holiday read that you can just read to sort of enjoy and relax and get away. But at the same time, it's a book I'd recommend if you want to be kind of intellectually stimulated and emotionally kind of stimulated to a certain extent as well. It's really, really good. And it's just quite unique as well, I think. And I haven't managed to read very many reviews on it myself. But I'm not even sure there are that many particularly. But it's definitely worth a go for sure. I highly recommend it. So it feels a little bit philosophical as well at times, which I really like. And, you know, anyone who follows me on this channel will know that I love philosophy. I'm always thinking about philosophy and, you know, thinking quite deeply in things and what it means to be alive at the moment and what we can do to live the best life possible and things that we can avoid. And I think Stephen Vizinczey in this book kind of gives us a bit of a warning. You know, the main protagonist, Mark Niven, ever since he was a child, he's been determined to kind of find buried treasure and become rich, and he manages to do that. I know that's a bit of a spoiler, but that's, you know, it'll tell you that on the back of the book. He manages to do that, and it's just quite a moral tale really after that, you know, and it's this idea that he thinks that the world is kind of against him, and actually if he's got loads of money he'll be okay. And it's almost that naivety of thinking that money is going to solve all your problems and give you that power, but actually he kind of sees the other people as monsters, and I don't think he quite realizes that we've all got a certain dark side. We've all got the monster within us to a certain extent, and actually I get the feeling, I could be wrong, but I get the feeling what Stephen's kind of saying is that as human beings we need to work together, and we're all kind of connected in one way or another. And actually if we try to just do things completely on our own and just become all powerful and rich, and that isn't going to work. Someone somewhere is going to try and take that off of you, and someone's going to have a problem with that. The only way that you can really succeed and be happy is by having a certain amount of acceptance of human nature and kind of connecting with other people and trying to do the right thing. And you might not end up rich necessarily, but you might end up a bit more fulfilled and hopefully a bit happier. And there are characters in the book. I've written notes, but my printer wouldn't work it out, so I'm just pretty much going from memory now, which is probably better in some ways. There's a character in the book somewhere, and Mark talks about the fact that he's reading a book on facts, 1,000 facts or something like that. And the person he's talking to, the character he's talking to, kind of says, "Well, what do you want to read that for?" And he says, "Oh, well, I can tell you the square footage of the state of the nation, you know, of North America or something like that." And he kind of responds, "Well, please don't." And it's quite comic. But Mark kind of says, you know, this book just helps me to relax. It helps me to switch my brain off, in other words, and I don't need to think when I'm thinking about things like that. And he basically makes the point that that's exactly what facts are. They're just mental anesthesia, you know. And I completely relate to that. And I think it's really important, isn't it, that we don't just consume facts and we don't just reduce things down all the time to their sort of monetary value and kind of become too scientific about everything. You know, everything needs to be measured and counted and balanced. Actually, the most important things in life are the things that you can't necessarily count and quantify and express through language. The most important things: love, the meaning you feel towards someone who means the world to you, the meaning you get from a fantastic song that you absolutely love, a piece of music, from reading a fantastic book, from looking at a fantastic piece of artwork. Those things you can't actually put into words, and if you try to put those things into words, you almost reduce them down so much that they lose their meaning. And I think that's what we're in danger of today. And Dr. Ian McGilchrist talks about this in one of the books that I reviewed the other day called the master and his emissary, the Western world and the divided brain, or divided brain and the Western world, or something like that. And he makes the point that the left brain is very much dominated by kind of fact and reducing things down and understanding and making sense of it in a way that we can express it through language. And the right brain is far more kind of the bigger picture and more instinctive and kind of almost finds overall meaning in things, if that makes sense. I'm probably being a bit vague, but he makes the point that we've been far too left brain driven in recent times, maybe the past 100 years, when we've become more scientific and, you know, the Enlightenment and modernism and things, where we've basically turned our back on religion and music to a certain extent and art to a certain extent, and everything becomes about science and fact. And he makes the point that if we go too much down that road, if we keep thinking in that way, then we're going to end up destroying ourselves, unfortunately. And you know, the rates of suicide are higher than they ever have been, and people are reporting to be less happy than before. And he kind of makes the point that we need to get back to finding meaning in things that we can't necessarily express, like art, like music, like love, relationships. You know, be less connected online but more connected face to face. Get back to the pub where people can. I know we've had this pandemic and we can't be face to face so much at the minute, but we need to try and find ways of getting together again and actually connecting with people. And I get the feeling that in this book, that's kind of a little bit of what he's talking about. I don't think it's necessarily the main theme of the book particularly, but I think that's kind of what he's saying. You can't be like Mark. You can try to be so focused that you find the buried treasure at the bottom of the sea that's worth 300 million and you become the richest person. But actually, if your attitude is it's you against the world is going to win. You can't be successful. You can't be a kind of successful hermit on your own. Someone's going to take it off of you or con you out of it. You have to play the game a little bit, and for good or for better or worse, you know, maybe playing the game means having a bit of a connection with your own dark side to a certain extent, but you need to want to try and do things for the better overall for yourself, but also for your community. And that was the feeling that I got. Maybe I'm wrong, but that was how it kind of spoke to me. And I think that Stephen Vizinczey is influenced by the people that he talks about. And Dostoevsky said, and I'm not going to quote him now, but he said something on the lines of, every man is responsible for himself, but he's responsible for every other man as well. It wasn't exactly like that, but it was something along those lines. And I think that's a really scary kind of thing to think about, isn't it? And Jordan Peterson talks about this, and it's scary to sort of think, hang on a minute, I can see how you can be responsible for yourself, but how can you be responsible for everyone else? Well, actually, it's not until we start taking responsibility for everyone else that we're going to make a change. You know, we can shout about the environment, we can shout about inequality, but until we actually start acting in a way that's going to make that better, what difference is it going to make? You can do your recycling and you can vote for the right political party as you see it, but if you're buying clothes for £1 a t-shirt that are being manufactured somewhere by slave labour that's causing pollution and not paying people properly and all the rest of it, and you're just as much of the problem as someone else. So we do have to take responsibility. We do have to think about our actions, you know, and it's difficult, isn't it? But I just think the message of this book is fantastic. So Anthony Burgess, I got this online. Anthony Burgess wrote in Punch that Vizinczey could teach the English how to write English. He praised the novel's prose style and its sly apophthegms, as well as in the solidity of its characters, good and detestable alike. And Burgess ended his review by saying, I was entertained but also deeply moved. Here is a novel set bang in the middle of our corrupt world that in some curious way breathes a kind of desperate hope. And I kind of like that, really. So Mark says at one point, people are monsters and I'd better get rich or I'll have to depend on monsters. And I think that kind of sums up his attitude, doesn't it? He wants to be rich so he can just be the one and only Superman on his own. And I noticed there was a review in an Australian paper as well, where the guy basically said that this isn't the sort of book that's written by someone who is motivated by greed, basically. It's written by someone who you can tell has suffered, loved, worked and laughed. And he says that to be able to instill all those experiences together into a novel is a really important thing. And that made me think of Zorba the Greek. And Zorba the Greek talks about the catastrophe. Is it the catastrophe of life, or is it the great catastrophe? I can't remember, something like the catastrophe of life, isn't it? I'm getting it wrong. I'll edit that in afterwards. But basically, Zorba is kind of talking about the whole catastrophe, he says, doesn't he? He's talking about his life, how he's loved, he's been married, he's had kids, he's worked, he's done all these different things, the whole catastrophe, he says. And he's basically trying to make the point that life is about doing all of these things. It's not just about sticking your head in a book and dreaming about things, actually getting out there and getting your hands dirty and experiencing things. And I get the feeling that maybe Stephen Vizinczey is a little bit like that himself, potentially. Again, if I'm wrong, forgive me on that, but that's the feeling I get. And I think maybe that guy in the National Times in Australia, when he wrote that, was probably thinking the same thing. And I've talked about this before on this channel. Life is full of catastrophe, isn't it? And that's easy to say sometimes, when you're going through catastrophe, it's horrendous. But we know that it is, and we kind of need to work on ourselves as best we can in order to prepare for things. And that's why personal development is so important, and why I talk about it so much, and why I teach stress management to staff teams and all of that stuff, and why I do these videos and why I think about these things. Yeah, and at one point he talks to a character called Valentine, and Valentine says, I still remember the days when people got rich exploiting other people, basically, and today you grab money and power by helping the less fortunate. And he says, imagine what it would be like to be a director of social care, taking a pension, getting a bonus, blah, blah, blah. You've got the guilt of the people you look after, but that's a small price to pay kind of thing. You only have to worry about other people's problems, but it's no problem. And I find that quite interesting as well, because obviously social care is a big thing at the minute with the pandemic and this, where I am in the UK. And I work in social care. I'm a social care consultant. So I work with directors. My wife's been a director in social care before as well. And I sort of work at that level at the minute. And yeah, it's just interesting to hear that. It's a funny one because, yeah, some people do make a lot of money out of other people's kind of misery, I guess, in some ways. But there are people who make a difference as well, I suppose, and get paid well because I suppose they deserve to. They take that extra responsibility on. And so it's easy to be bitter, isn't it, I suppose, and to shoot down anyone who does well financially. But actually, the system we have at the minute, the capitalist system we have at the minute, unfortunately, is the best that we've got. Winston Churchill said that, what was it he said about democracy? That they're all Winston Churchill basically said, and I can't remember the quote frustratingly enough, but basically something on the lines that democracy is the best system out of all. They're all useless, and even democracy, but it's the best one that we've got, basically, in other words. And, it's a really important point, isn't it? All governments become corrupt to a certain extent. When people have power, there's going to be corruption there. But I don't think corruption is the basis of things. I really don't. I think there's a deeper meaning going on. I think we've been guided for hundreds, if not thousands of years by a certain faith in things being better, driving forward in the right way. Of course, we can't be naive. Of course, we have to understand that human nature has the power to completely sideswipe us and take us out. But actually, I think if power was the only reason we were here, we'd have been finished by now. I think it gets in there, it works its way in, people become corrupted and it causes problems, but I don't think it's the overarching reason for things. So I think the system we have is the best that we've got for now, even though it's completely faulty, of course. But I think it's just interesting thinking about that and trying to be grateful for what we have. And I think that's almost the story of Mark Niven in this book, really. It's kind of, you can make money if you set your mind to it and you do the very best you possibly can, but you better be prepared when you do that your own human nature is going to be a problem, and the human nature of the people that surround you is going to be a problem as well. So you either toughen up and get realistic, or you're going to fall flat and be taken advantage of. So it's a really, really good book. I love this book. Stephen Vizinczey, I think he seems a really lovely guy. I think what I've read of his stuff, what I've listened to of him on YouTube is fantastic. I highly recommend it. Thank you very much. Keep liking, keep subscribing, and I'll speak soon. Cheers.